Now, interestingly enough, following that, in June 11 of '08, there was a collection agreement. And this is something the public might be aware of from some articles they read or what have you, but Lochsa not only, WPT, not only made these maps, but they are also hired a company called Tetra Tech, who is writing the environmental documents, the draft EIS and the EIS. And there's a forest ID team that reviews what goes into that. And I have the instructions to the forest ID team that were given by Supervisor Riley, the instructions that were given to the ID team as to how they would review. And one of the comments that really kind of got the hair on the back of my neck up was the comment that I will determine how much detail is needed. That was from Mr. Riley.
So detail
to his ID team. Now, the ID team and the person who's heading this up for lands, Teresa Trurock, their involvement in this, whenever they're working on this, is paid for by WPT. And in 2008 and 2009, those fiscal years, they were reimbursed for their work to the tune of $280,000. So Tetra Tech is being paid for by WPT. The Forest Service involvement in this is being paid for by WPT, and we're the public, we are to believe that this is not a done deal.
When they invest that much money into making this exchange happen, they're planning on it going through, is what you're saying with all the money involved.
I'm saying that there was virtually a guarantee from our Washington office elected officials that this would go through. The Forest Service, I was never up there, so I can't tell you, but the Forest Service could not initiate something involving these millions of dollars on its own. When you got millions of bucks involved, the politicians are there. And
well,
I can't make that connection, I can't verify that, but it only makes common sense. And you saw some of the stuff you guys dug up on who had contributed what to various people. And there's so many ways to hide contributions to campaigns that it's not funny, but let's go on with the timeline.
On the timeline, is there connection there with Tim Blixseth, and he's been a lot of court cases involving recently with Credit Suisse, in which he had taken a loan out from, and Credit Suisse we've found is Mike Crapo's #1 campaign contributor.
Yeah, see, Kathy, that's where the Friends of the Spruce Ranger District and their research of documents and what have you has been invaluable in this effort to make what looks like connections. You know,
yeah.
What looks like connections. Now, you can't say that, come right out and say, well, you know, this is the connection to this or that. But you can draw your own conclusions, and that's what you're saying.
Yeah, because we've repeatedly asked Mike Crapo how he stands on the Upper Lochsa, and we continue to get the same answer. I'm sure as a lot of the public has. They just get a generic letter that just says that they're waiting for the process to go through.
Yeah.
When the position he's in, he could say, the public does not want this land exchange, and stop it.
Yeah. Sure, and you would think you would, but anyway, there was that, and this collection agreement, you know, that was acquired under the Freedom of Information Act. I have that collection agreement. There was also a cruise that had to be made. Now, that's a cruise of the saw log volumes on both the private, WPT, and the identified Forest Service got it. And that was being paid for, and the cruisers were employed by WPT. But the check cruise is made by the Forest Service, by Forest Service personnel. Interesting enough to note, and I can't verify the third check cruise failure, but the first two cruises failed the check cruise.
Now, what's involved in this cruise? What is it?
You go out and you perform a cruise of the sawlog volume, to whatever dimensions were determined in the cruise plan. In other words, if they say diameter at breast height will be 6 inches or greater, you know, to be
of tree size.
Called, yeah, tree size.
Okay.
And then you measure the diameter and you measure the height of the tree, and you have a plot size, and you have a basal area factor. I'm not a cruiser, but I have helped with cruises that determines how big this diameter circle will be from where you establish the plot. And then you write down that plot information, and you go on certain distance, certain direction to another area. You know, you just put on the map what you're going to do, and then you do it. You don't go a certain, you know, say, well, we're going to cruise this and we're going to cruise that. You have a predetermined area you go to. So then the check cruiser comes along, you have the plot mark, and he sees how valid your measurements are. And when you fail twice, your measurements aren't really that great. And I told one person, I said, well, when it comes to the blues, if you wait very long, the trees will have grown. So your check cruise is going to fail. That's kind of, you know, that's just kind of in a joking way, but they failed the check cruise. I know twice, and I've heard through confidential sources 3 times. And remember what we said earlier, that
so value for value, the value's
value
not
for
there.
value, dollar for dollar, which is why there isn't enough land up there. You know, there isn't enough standing timber
In the upper Lochsa
in the upper
lands.
Lochsa for the original 28,000 acres that they asked for. And so they reduced those acres to say, okay, maybe 18,000 acres.
Yeah.
And then we'll purchase the land up here because the public has raised such heck on some of these lands that they were dropped.
Well, the Forest Service said right from the very beginning, their projected was that they would need about 18,000 acres. And that they added up to 28,000 acres, 28,212 acres, and knowing that they would not need anywhere near that amount of acreage. But yet they told the public that's the acreage they started with, even though they knew right from the start it was nowhere near that amount of acreage.
Well, see, you can make it sound like a win-win in that case.
So it's a way to basically, I see it as deceiving the public, saying, you know, well, we reduced it to 18,000 acres in the public's eye, when that was their original target, was the 18,000 acres, or 20,000.
Sure, you could twist that in a number of ways, however you want to. One is that they knew there wasn't enough standing sawlog volume in the upper Lochsa to exchange for the 28,000 plus acres down here.
Right.
They knew that, but they wanted to cruise enough. And then consider, hey, Mary Minerva McCroskey State Park, you know, or consider things north of Beauville in the Anadromous Fisheries, or south of Little Boulder Campground in the Anadromous Fisheries. These areas were pointed out, said, boy, we got to drop that. Or consider what Fish and Game inputs caused them. You know, you have to say, we're going to cruise all these things, but boy, if we run up against something, we're not going to be stymied. The American River, you know,
Right.
when the Ingrams made such a fuss down there, well, we'll drop the American River. They knew they could drop that. But if they didn't get conflicts, those were the lands that were wanted the most by the
The
developer.
28,212 acres.
Well, particular pieces in there that were dropped, they wanted the most.
Right, like the watershed in Elk River
Yeah.
being one of them.
Well, all of it. Well, let's go on before we get
Okay.
in detail on this. So they had their collection agreement, and I have their collection agreement. That's where I acquired that $28,000 or $280,000 that were Forest
Correct.
Services reimbursed, and that was in June of 2008 that the collection agreement was made. In April, I have to go back because in April of 2008, then Supervisor Riley informs the district of exchange, and that letter that I read, portions of the letter, was in reference to Riley's visiting the Palouse district and telling the employees what was going to happen. Okay, then in June, again, of 2008, there was a statement of work. And that's a third-party NEPA contract, and that's what I already talked about, where the Forest Service and WPT have agreed to pursue a land exchange. They already agreed. Public, no knowledge yet. 2008.
And that's after they already signed a memorandum of
Yes.
understanding
Yes,
in February of 2008.
Yes. Now,
So they went all these months with no knowledge to the public whatsoever.
Yeah, and all these documents, all this agreement, and money being spent in exchange. Then you get to July of 2008, and that was the cruise plan. They began cruising in July of 2008. So you're putting a lot of investment on the ground in pursuit of this. Now, in September of 2008, they made a feasibility analysis. Now, doesn't that sound like something the public should have been involved with?
The public should have known all
Hey,
about this right
we
from
got
the
this
start.
proposal.
This is a proposal that we have.
Now we're making a feasibility analysis after you've already agreed to all of this stuff? A feasibility analysis? Anyway, I noted that it was recommended by Supervisor Riley on September the 15th, 08, but it wasn't approved by the regional office until September 22nd of 2008. But one day later, there was an agreement to initiate. What? Agreement to initiate? My God, you've already had a cruise, you've already exchanged and expended money, and now you're going to have an agreement to initiate this exchange? And that was signed, incidentally, that was signed prior to the approval of the feasibility analysis by the regional office. You see,
So then,
everything is snowballing, and it's becoming, now we've got to make sure we got all the legal bases covered. Did you do a feasibility analysis? Oh my gosh, we do it. Well, then that has to be followed by an agreement to initiate. Oh yeah, next day, we agreed to initiate. You see? And then,
so the feasibility analysis should have been the very first thing done.
I'm not saying
Is what
they
how
have,
it looks.
yeah, but you can bet that they have covered every base that was legally meant to be covered.
Yes.
And it's the same in the previous exchanges that we talked about. The Beaver Cedar exchange was an EIS. They didn't have to do that on the McGarry-Johnson exchange on the Palouse district because it was an environmental assessment report instead of an EIS.
Right.
Yeah, okay, so then, now, here comes the public. After all this, the feasibility, the agreement to initiate, the cruise already going on, the memorandum of understanding, and all that. Now, on September the 25th, 2008, the article comes out in the News and Record, which is the Lewiston Tribune, public notice is given. Now, how is it given?
After all this money is spent
And- yeah.
by Western Pacific Timber.
Yeah,
And all these parcels have been chosen without the public's knowledge.
yeah. Okay, so that was September of 2008. Then, they projected in that there would be scoping meetings held by the public, for the public. Of course, if you didn't get any notification or anything, the general public, you didn't get the trib, you don't know about this, but the scoping meetings are set for November. Now remember, who are the users in here? Hunters, people that work, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You know, November 17, 18, and 19 at Elk River, at Moscow, and at Elk City, because there's a large portion of exchange near Elk City, including the Elk City Ranger Station. So they have these scoping meetings, and they're set up to be run from 5 o'clock in the evening to 7 o'clock or something. It's dark city. Can you imagine how many people are going to Elk River at that time? My gosh. And
No,
I
because-
attended the Elk River meeting along with my brother and a current employee from the district. We attended that meeting. I'll bet there wasn't 4 publics or 5 publics at that meeting, but there was Forest Service, there was Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, there was WPT, and you know, and they had stations, not stations, you went in and you just talked, you know. Forest Service knew nothing about the particulars of these lands. Most people, whatever handful was there, thought that this was a continuation of a project called Robo Elk, and they had already been on the ground for it. So hardly nobody turned out for that.
So,
then,
and these were the maps that the public was showing,
sure,
which clearly there's no highway going through there. You can't find
yeah,
where the locations
here-
are.
Here's a highway, and here's Elk River. And this is the big unit that has essentially been dropped, except for some of the bottom portion down
that we
here.
believe, possibly.
And this was a part that was in the watershed and they dropped a portion of that. Whatever part comes into the Partridge Creek watershed was dropped after significant input from the
But
public.
this is the map that the public saw. You can't see where there's any roads going into here or any of the taxpayers' money involved in developing this. And
Well, again, here's state lands, but you don't see all the potlatch land that's involved in this exchange. I'm still making that connection between WPT, Blixseth, and potlatch because of what was purchased by potlatch at McCall. And the fact that Plum Creek execs came to potlatch, and I can't imagine that as smart as people like that must be, that they would let the upper Lochsa be snatched up by a land developer that wants to exchange land that's right around their ownership. To corroborate that kind of deal, what I would say, when we were at the Tri-County Commissioners meeting in Lewiston, Lonnie Way and I, when asked by either Lonnie or myself, what do you do with this land when you get it? There's only 3 of you at the most that are involved in the management of it. We sell the timber under contract, and we sell the land to the nearest industrial landowner, which is Putnam. Now, they tried to deny that in several meetings, but I didn't take the notes, but I have the notes that were taken by somebody else at the commissioners meeting down in Lewiston.
Right.
So then comes the meeting in Moscow. They held at the, what is it, the employment office or?
yeah,
Anyway, I finally found a place, but in the meantime, my brother and I happened to go out we went out to this unit up here, which I was very familiar with. That's called North Bowville Unit. And we went out there, and I did a little filming out there of what we saw, you know, because that's an anadromous fisheries. And there's been tremendous study put into the West Fork of Potlatch Creek as far as that anadromous fisheries is concerned. West Fork of Potlatch Creek comes up through here. In fact, the documentation on that, the draft EIS and the EIS and the decision notice weighed 7.5 pounds.
And that was all about the fish in that
And that was all
particular
about this
parcel?
area up here, and we're gonna trade that out, see? That shows how little the people knew of the areas that were put up. Anyway, we went out there, and we also went up to Jerome Creek. Now, when we were at Jerome Creek, up there, we met a near neighbor who pulled up with a horse trailer, and she had a friend with her, and they were unloading their horses. And I says, do you realize that in a couple of years you might not be able to unload your horses here? What? Because they're going for day ride. We got tons of people in this area that are horse people, you know?
Yeah.
Go for rides all the time. And said, what do you mean? I said, well, this is in a land exchange. And they're having a meeting down in Moscow. You know, we gave her the date, the 18th, and it spread the word. And everybody we met when we were out, you know, in these areas, and in Waterhole Creek, we'd stop and say, hey, do you know about this? No, go to the meeting. So they had a few more people at the Moscow meeting.
Yeah.
Then the one that was held at Elk River on the 19th, two really important people attended that. And when they attended it, this was Roger and Janice Ingram from Grangeville. And Roger, like Tom, is kind of he's a photography expert and a lot of stuff on wildlife. And I've got that upside down. And so he got wind of this, and this is the land around Elk City that was in the exchange. Now, this is the American River that flows up through here, and that's an anadromous fishery. What a super place for development. You wanted to get land that was really great. You say, hey, you can put your $1 million house up here, you know, and you can fish first.
You can watch the fish. It's so clean. You can see the fish in the stream.
So this is interesting because this land was put up when the supervisor of the Nez Perce National Forest was Jane Cottrell. And she put this land up along with the Elk City Ranger Station, which is right here. That was in the exchange. So anyway, Roger, in November the 20th, took his video camera and he went up here after making a great presentation, an introductory presentation, and he went up here and filmed this, and he sent a copy of that DVD that he had made, an 8-minute copy. He sent it to Tom Riley. He sent it to Jane Cottrell, who had put this up, who he personally knew, who was now Deputy Regional Forester. He sent it to Tom Tidwell, who was the Regional Forester. He sent that copy of that to Abigail Kimball, who was the Chief of the Forest Service. Do you know that unique 8-minute disc that those people received did not receive a single comment?
And they did an amazing job on it too. I've seen it. It was a wonderful,
beautiful production. But when you, a public official, do not have the common courtesy to respond to something like that, you know this is a done deal. And that makes me angry as heck. The same was true with that letter that was sent to Mr. Tidwell from a lowly employee on the Police Ranger District that was sent to the forest supervisor as a letter, a copy of that to Mr. Tidwell, and not one response from their supervisor? That's terrible.
Yeah, most people, I know a lot of letters have been sent with no response, or very, very little if they have gotten any.
Well, because these were so unique, and not getting a response, it's wrong.
Yeah.
It's wrong. And when Abigail Kimball says, hey, make it happen, it was already a done deal.
Yeah.
And this would have cruised right
well,
on
the
through.
timeline shows
okay,
that.
so we go back to the timeline here. But in November, they had these scoping meetings. In December, the 7 dwarfs went to the county commissioners. And that's our 7 retirees. Went to the county commissioners, and the district ranger, Kara Chadwick, was invited by the county commissioners as well. And we talked to the commissioners. Now, to me, this is another important part. Over the years, the Forest Service rangers, which I'm not a ranger, never was, but 3 of these people in the 7 dwarfs were rangers. They established tremendous credibility with county commissioners. Now, when that credibility is broken, like the ranger broke, because she was told by the forest supervisor, when you're in an official capacity, you will speak of this exchange in positive light. So Kara had gone to the county commissioners, spoke of this exchange in a positive light, and the county commissioners, having their hands full with everything else, having already developed a tremendous trust in what the forest ranger told them, says, hey, fine. When we went there and started talking to the commissioners, they got disturbed. And what that happened was that they caused another scoping session to take place later on. They caused that scoping session to take place. But that took place over a number of articles that were appearing in the paper, opinion stuff, you guys getting informed and things like that. But here, on the 12th and in December 17th, just a couple of weeks after we had met with the county commissioners, WPT set up a tri-county commissioners meeting down in Lewiston to extol the virtues of the exchange. Lonnie Way and I attended that meeting, and I have notes that were taken by somebody who was there at the meeting that talks about, hey, we'll sell to the nearest landowner and this kind of thing. It was presented to the Tri-County Commissioners as a very positive light, and we cast some doubts on that. And that's where a person invaluable like Johnny Allen, the commissioner in Clearwater County, who was adamantly opposed to this because he spent a lot of time in the Elk River area with the Potlatch Timber Protective Association. He was a pilot for him. He knows this land like the back of his hand. And he came out very much against it. Well then, in going on with the process, there's a lot of things happening in between these dates. But in January the 3rd, Blake Ballard, another one of the 7 retirees, Lonnie Way, man who spent 36 years in civic culture on the Police Ranger District. Irv Johnson, another one who spent 20 years on the Police District, and myself met with Tom Riley and Teresa Trulock in the Fish and Game office down in Lewiston. And we absolutely got nowhere. We were there for 3.5 hours, and it was like we were talking to a granite boulder. I mean, this was going to happen. The public had not been really stirred yet.
Well, the public, most of the public still had no awareness of this
Right.
whatsoever.
Yeah, that's right. It was articles in the paper like Johnson and stuff, and word of mouth that the public became informed. And it was through people at Mary Monroe McCoskey annual meeting in Tinson.
Yes, yeah, that's where,
That stirred up the
that was a
folks
big
around there.
kickoff to get
Yeah.
the public aware.
Kicked in Cheryl and Al, who had gotten a letter, official
But didn't know.
letter, which says, hey, to the owners or interested party. And the map was
Yeah.
small, they couldn't read it, and say, hey, what's this has to do with me? But that was an official part of notification,
Yeah.
see? So anyway, then they had the, in February, I found out through Freedom of Information that WPT had failed a recruit. So that was the second.
Right.
That was the second
Yeah.
thing, I know. So they had to go on a third one. And then in April 8th, 2009, the informed public had its say. And that was the meeting in Moscow, that overflow crowd, where people turned away,
Yeah.
that the public, interestingly enough, I don't know whether Tom Trail has gotten the voice recording that was made by Ron Erickson at that meeting. He was at the meeting. Now he was a lands person that was with the regional officer out of the Panhandle, one of the two.
Yeah.
I went up to him afterwards, and he was also at Benoit County meeting. He was
Yeah.
the spokesman there. But when I went up to him after that meeting, I said, was anybody, I didn't see anybody recording it. And he indicated that he had a voice recording of it. And Tom Trail, under Freedom of Information, has asked for that voice recording. I did some video on it, but I could not get the voice because I didn't have that kind of, and I was in the back of the crowd. But that was an irate crowd. And I went up to Supervisor Riley afterwards, and I said, boy, Tom, they really kind of put the heat on, didn't you? Good. No sweat. A man that cannot feel and understand the emotions that were in that crowd regarding this exchange has no business ever being a forest supervisor. And I
No,
will
he
say the
wasn't
same
listening.
thing
Yeah.
for Mr. Tidwell, and I say the same thing for Gene Cottrell. If you can't hear your public and respond, you should not be in the position jury.
No, the public is paying their wages. We are paying them to take care of this land and represent the people, and they're not listening.
Well, anyway, after this meeting, the Latah County Commissioners in April of '09 came out in public opposition, unanimously in public opposition. In April, the Clearwater County Commissioners voted in favor of it 2-1. And at that time, I understand that the Clearwater County Commissioners, or the Idaho County Commissioners, were in favor of it because of the taxes they would lose out on up above. And that was what hinged on all of this right here, was, hey, we'll pick up these lands and be able, to get taxes off of those lands.
Mm-hmm.
But what a ridiculous proposition that this is, because look, you're you're further dividing, and I don't know how those lands have been managed. That's why I can't speak with any authority, because I know how these lands have been managed. And I can't speak with any authority, but I see the roads in there, so I imagine that these have been well managed. Here's property line, you know it's been run. This is also federal, because that's BLM, and that's why the BLM got involved in this in the first place.
Oh, because of the ranger station that was there.
No, the ranger station is the Forest Service.
And
But the BLM got involved in this because, hey, maybe we could exchange some BLM land.
the ranger station is on BLM property though.
Okay, that's something I don't know, but,
It is.
but
They
I've
told
been
me.
to the ranger station and there's nothing there that says this is BLM property. Because I fought fire out of this meadow here, and up here on Meadow Creek. But regardless of that, the ranger station is owned by the
Right,
feds.
yeah.
I mean, by the Forest Service. The grounds might be owned by BLM. But this is interesting too. Because remember when we were talking about the Beaver Cedar Exchange and the McGarry Johnson Exchange?
Yep.
Well, Supervisor Caswell was supervisor of the Clearwater at the time of those two exchanges. That was controversial exchanges, but they didn't get into the public eye.
Yeah, the public, I never heard of them.
No, you
I
didn't.
don't know of any of the public that did know about what was happening there. And
I'll tell you, Harvey Neese, who's involved in this, Everett Hagan, and myself were the main people involved in trying to oppose those two exchanges. And we had a number of current, at that time, Forest Service employees and retired Forest Service employees who also opposed it. But, again, the decisions were not made locally. The signer is designated, and that was Caswell, and he signed off on it. And I don't think the man wanted to sign off on it, because I think at that time Senator Krebs was senator, and he was pushing this to no end. Can I say that with any authority? No, I can only say it on hearsay. But follow then Mr. Caswell's career when he retired from the Forest Service. Who was the senator? Senator Kempthorne became governor of the state of Idaho. Mr. Caswell went from retiree after signing the Beaver Cedar Exchange to the designated species coordinator for the state of Idaho. And it was my understanding that there had never been a designated species coordinator for the state of Idaho prior to Jim's getting that. And then when Mr. Kempthorne went from there to the head of the Department of Interior, Mr. Caswell became chief of the BLM. Mr. Caswell and chief of the Forest Service, Abigail Kimball, were back in Washington, D.C. at the time. This appears to follow the exact same pattern that was used in the Beaver Cedar Exchange. If the public hadn't become involved, if the commissioners hadn't taken up the cause, this would have been a done deal.
yeah, it would have been done a long time ago.
And that's what's so disturbing. I mean, it might be this big wildlife corridor, you know, and the attributes of that, and the passage for the grizzly bears, and all this stuff. Nature Conservancy, that makes people think this is a higher calling, a greater use for these national forest lands. But you don't do it without informing the owners.
Yeah, the public has the right to know, and should have known right from the start.
And I believe, I thoroughly believe, although I know nothing about other exchanges, outside of the state of Idaho. I thoroughly believe that this has been going on for years.
Mhm.
And it finally got to where the public, because of you folks, got involved, and the local politicians got involved, and they're taking up the cause. And when you cannot get the politicians in the Washington office to stand up and say no to something like this, then you know they're involved from the very beginning.
They're failing the public.
Of course they
We are paying their wages to represent us, and they're failing the public.
But you would not have known about that, unless you got involved the way you did.
Yeah.
And so that's that's kind of a timeline, and there's more that goes on here. The Moscow Daily News came out with an editorial opposing the exchange, and the Elk River City Council, Ronnie Way and I went down there, Supervisor Riley was there, and Ronnie and I gave a spiel because the council, because this land down here, pretty darn close to Elk River, that land be developed. Hey, they hunt, they fish, they do everything down there, and they were on the fence. And when we got done talking to them, Mr. Riley didn't have a chance because he knows nothing about these lands. And they voted unanimously to oppose the exchange.
Of which they still are very opposed
yes.
to the exchange.
Sure. And so, then they had January 8th, 2009, Idaho Fish and Game. And the letter that they came out and opposed, they looked at each one individually and talked about its worth as the value of it to wildlife, and sometimes they didn't have. For instance, Mary Minerva McCroskey State Park, I thought that was pretty obvious. Hey, this, that should be parkland. We've tried in the Forest Service to get it to the park. We haven't found a way to do that. But then WPT started working with the parks people, thinking, oh, we can ride the white horse, come in, ride the white horse and say, hey, we'll get this through the exchange and then we'll work a deal with you. And so what happened from this Fish and Game letter was something I never thought about, because you can't hunt on parklands.
Exactly.
You can't hunt on parklands, but the value to Fish and Game is they have depredation hunts right down in here.
Right.
If that becomes you can hunt on national forest, so you could go up there and push the game down to keep from having depredation hunts, to do good game management up there through hunting. But if that goes into the Park Service, you can't do that. So they didn't want that parcel in the exchange. For that reason, it wasn't that they didn't want the park to have it, but they wanted to keep it open for that. And then they spoke of several other things. Some I learned, it didn't make any difference. But when we get to talk about individual parcels and we go out, we can talk about this, and I have pictures on it. I have pictures here. I have pictures up in the Crane Point area. They were opposed.
Crane Point area was a moose calving ground.
Yeah. And I've hunted up there, and I know it's loaded with moose. Anyway, there's been a lot of money that's been poured in on the public's behalf in that piece of property there. And Fish and Game opposes that because it's the last bit of public land right up in there. And they did not oppose this, although they said, hey, if you could find other parcels, leave them alone. And that's right where Al and Cheryl live up there. That's why they became involved and really fought. Up here, the opposition was because of the Nadmus fisheries and the work that the Forest Service had put in tremendous dollars. I have pictures again on the dollars that went into land management, timber sales, timber harvest, removing roads, planting good trees in the aftermath of that. This land down here was acquired about 10 years ago from Potlatch Corporation after they had cut it over explicitly because of the anadromous fisheries in the Potlatch River. And we have done tremendous amount, the Forest Service has done a tremendous amount of work along the Potlatch River and the anadromous fisheries on that piece of ground. This was opposed, again, by Elk City, opposed because this land is highly developed, lots of pictures, highly developed from a multiple use standpoint. And speaking of the exchanges, speaking of the exchanges, this land, this piece of ground over in here had a lot of national forest land, isolated, difficult to manage in the McGarry section, 4,300 acres that were exchanged for 1,993 acres right along here that was owned by Potlatch, unroaded, can't be developed. And now there's a moratorium, so to speak, on developing roads in this area. Hey, Forest Service, the public got gypped out of all that land. They have to pay now to use the roads that they built.
Well, thing I find on this map here, you can't see any of those creeks going through there.
Oh no.
You can't see that there's the Palouse River's not identified through there, so the public wouldn't know.
No,
Unless they're
it's
very
all done for
familiar
a
with
very
that parcel.
specific reason. I mean,
Yeah.
they could have, the WPT could have used a forest map.
Yeah, but the
they
forest
didn't
maps
wanna
identify
do it
everything, and it's too easy to see.
because it has property owners on it too.
Property owners and everything's identifiable.
Exactly right. So anyway, here you see something that Forest Service retirees say, if these go, that's 14,000 acres off of the Palouse district, which is one of the smallest districts in the region, GS 13 Ranger, and it produced in a 10-year period from 1995 to 1996 to 2005, it produced a half of the sale volume that came off of all of this. And it continues to do it because it's so productive. And it has fish and game and that out the year, if it's fertile ground for growing trees, it's fertile ground for wildlife.
Yep.
There's no denying. You have
And the
pictures
public
of that.
loses all of it.
And so here, this map is most significant to me in the way that it says, if you were back in the Washington office and you knew nothing about these parcels out here, how they were managed or anything else, and you saw checkerboard in the upper Lochsa, and you said, my God, why are we wasting our time managing this ground when we can have a solid block of national forest ownership up here? Let's trade that. I mean, if you knew nothing about the land and you didn't seek to know anything. But when we saw this starting to happen, we said, you know, the whole district and all these scattered parcels on the St. Mary's Ranger District now, look at this checkerboard stuff in the upper St. Joe.
Mm-hmm.
That's next.
Yeah.
And all of these lands, big timber, and particularly Potlatch, has their eyes on acquiring these lands. And if the politicians have anything to say about it, they'll get it. Unless the public, like the Friends of the Palouse Ranger District, stand up and take a stance like you've been doing and say, no, you guys, we aren't going to re-elect you if you're going to do this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's
We're going to
spiel,
try to
guys.
get it stopped.
I don't